Our story begins with an odd little boy who spent far too much time watching other people play video games online, and far too little actually playing them for himself. This boy wasn't much of what you'd call a gamer. The only games he really played regularly were mobile apps and The Sims, because real games were too complicated or boring or something along those lines. To put it simply, he was a fake gamer. A normie even. But fast forward a few years, and somehow all of that had changed. This odd little boy had a newfound love of adventure games, fighting games, puzzle games, strategy games, sandbox games, and pretty much everything under God's great sun.
No, fucking Jesus.
Except sports games. He never understood the appeal of those. Overrated as fuck, if you ask me. Anyways. What changed his mind, you may ask? It was a chance encounter between him and one particular game that made him reevaluate everything. A game that felt large and expansive without it being too complicated or slow for a hyperactive child to take interest in. A game that combined all of the previously mentioned genres into one bite-sized package, making it an accessible gateway into all of them. A game called Spore. It left so much of an impression on him that years later, once he decided to throw his life away and become an obnoxious YouTuber, it was only a matter of time before he dug it up once again.
Spore. You know, despite the fact that that's an actual word, I believe the first time I ever heard it was back in the 6th grade when my best friend told me he was gonna get it for me for my birthday. Except that I remember mishearing it as spork and then politely trying to contain my disappointment that my best friend was gonna get me a postmodernist eating utensil for my birthday. But come the big day, I was pleasantly surprised to receive a game with a funny name about aliens. This very copy right here of Spore.
Your personal universe in a box,
The casing proudly proclaimed.
create your universe, evolve your creature, explore your planet and beyond, share with the world.
Oh, and it was also created by the same people as The Sims. That had 11-year-old me sold. So first thing the next day, I booted up the game, put in the registration code from the instruction booklet because that's a thing you had to do back then, and for the first time ever, I saw this screen. Now that's a hit of nostalgia. Then I was taken to the game's home menu, which was unlike any other home menu I'd seen. Instead of having, buttons, this menu just shows you a bunch of planets. These planets are all ripe for the picking, and so I picked one, named it, hit start, and before I knew it, I was a cell swimming around collecting DNA points in order to evolve. The deeper I got into the game, the more I developed my planet and creatures, the more I gained an appreciation for what games could be, the creativity that they could bring out in a player. Spore quickly became one of my favorite games. I remember being obsessed with it, waiting till I could get home to play it, telling my singing teacher, yes, I took singing lessons at the time, don't read into it too deeply, that when I got home I was gonna drop a nuclear bomb on a city of aliens. And all these years later, I still wonder how he reacted to that. So with all that being said, considering that everything I, as a player of games, owe to Spore and games like it was inevitable that one day I would want to go back and revisit it as an adult. And not too long ago, that day finally came when I stumbled upon this sitting on my shelf and thought, hey, I should play this again. So I spent a while trying to figure out how to get the game to work with Windows 11, finally got it to boot up, saw that nostalgic screen again, picked a planet, and for the first time in roughly 10 years, I played Spore. And it wasn't as good as I remembered it. I mean, it wasn't bad, but that magic and scope I remembered being there just wasn't present. The game is buggy, empty, vapid, frustratingly designed, fairly repetitive, and even the best things about it seemed a lot less impressive to me as an adult than they did to me as a kid. So I took to the internet to see if other people felt the same way, and apparently they do, en masse. This is a very common experience with people revisiting the game.
There, fine, done. Whoa! Whoa, God!
So, what happened? Did we only enjoy it because we were kids and we didn't know better? Did I only enjoy it because of my relative inexperience with other games? Did the game age poorly? Did we age poorly? What happened? to Spore. There is perhaps no greater loss of potential in semi-recent gaming history than the Spore franchise, which never was. There's nothing else out there like what Maxis was trying to create with Spore, a game where you create an entire civilization from the emergence of its first single-celled organisms to its domination of the universe. A game where you can customize every last detail of your world. A game that combines about 5 genres into one, and it comes so close to doing it well. At the time of its release, I would say that despite its flaws, Spore was a good game. Not perfect, but a solid effort from EA that had the misfortune of aging poorly as the years rolled on. But it could have been a phenomenal game if things had just gone a little fucking differently. And its sequels could have been even better, had they only been made. So let's talk about that. Spore is divided into 5 segments: the cell stage, the creature stage, the tribal stage, the civilization stage, and the space stage. As stated by the developers, these stages were crafted with a powers of 10 mindset, which is to say that each stage was meant to feel 10 times larger than the one that came prior. Each one of these stages essentially functions as its own game. However, the cell stage only takes about 10 minutes to beat and is little more than a glorified intro to the rest of the game. You can evolve your creature by eating chunks of cell meat or cell plants, and then having single-celled organism sex with your single-celled organism girlfriend. And in doing so, find intuitive solutions to your problems. Having trouble outrunning the bigger fish? Or cells? Easy, just add more fins to make yourself faster. Having trouble finding food? Easy, give yourself 2 different sets of mouths so you can eat every type of food you encounter. Getting attacked from behind? Easy, just add a spike to your ass. This stage, short as it is, rewards ingenuity and creativity in your creature's design, setting the stage for what's to come. However, Spore only begins properly once you take that first step onto land and say to yourself, wait, this is an action-adventure game now? There are 2 ways you can go about playing this stage. Either assert dominance by killing all your neighbors, or befriend them by beating them all in a dance party. And try not to get killed by the scary big creatures that have 10 times your health. Oh shit, guys, this is the Germans. The Germans are here. It's over, pack it up, guys. No Lebensraum. The further you progress, the larger your brain becomes until eventually you gain the mental fortitude required to reference 2001: A Space Odyssey. This kicks off the next phase of the game, the tribal stage. No longer are you restricted to controlling only one guy. Now you can control an entire tribe of them at the same time. Whereas on the prior stage you had to collect DNA points to evolve, on the tribal stage you collect food to spend it on babies and buildings. I never knew. This stage ends when you achieve dominance over all rival tribes on your continent. Like before, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can aim for pacifism, which entails making everyone like you by playing didgeridoo for them. Or conquest, which is self-explanatory. Based on how you play this stage, your people will either become capitalists, religious zealots, or insane warmongers. Hey, who said you can't be all 3 things at once? This leads into the civilization stage, in which you must convert everybody else to your superior ideology. You can conquer them economically, militaristically, or by enlightening them to the one true religion. Also on this stage, your people finally establish a system of currency, but the real money lies in harvesting spice. Controlling spice gives you money which you can spend on troops to trade with or attack other cities, and you pretty much get the idea. It's an oversimplified version of Civ. And then you make it to the space stage, which is essentially the real game. This stage is far more developed than any of the others, and it'll soak up most of your playtime. Your goal? to expand your empire across the stars, and eventually to make it to the center of the galaxy where ancient secrets of the cosmos lie hidden. Every decision you've made up to this point will shape how your species turns out. This alters not only how they look, but how they act and what paths are open to you as a player. Will you conquer the galaxy or purchase it? Or neither? Sky's the limit. Except it's not. Plus, this game has an online feature, meaning that you can encounter and interact with other people's creatures and cities. The community really took this creature creator and ran with it. You can find pretty much anything you could imagine on the game's server, and perhaps even things you never would have imagined. I don't think many people would disagree with me when I say that the creature creator, aided by its intuitive design, is this game's biggest success. I cannot stress enough how creative and ahead of its time this idea for a game was. Even today, no game can really compare to its sheer level of ambition. Sure, we've gotten some games here and there that are similar to one of Spore's 5 stages, like Stellaris, which in many ways is just a more fleshed out version of Spore's Space Stage, though it's made by Paradox Interactive, which is probably the one company that's actually more greedy with its DLCs than EA.
Give me money. Money me. Money now.
But regardless, there are no games I can think of that are similar to all of Spore's stages at once. Spore still stands alone, one of a kind. As of now, it has no spiritual successor, and I think that's a terrible shame because, God knows, Spore could do with a few improvements here and there. Immediately upon revisiting the game, I thought to myself how empty the creature stage feels compared to how I remembered it. Most of its memorability comes from its charm and its flashiness. Sometimes when you're in the middle of play, a random spaceship will pull up and abduct someone, and it's things like that that really do go a long way. But the gameplay is almost non-existent. You basically just walk around and press buttons on the other animals. The decision you get to make is whether you press the green button or the red button. Even combat amounts to little more than just spamming a button and hoping that your attacks are stronger than those of your foe. Be cool if there was like a button you could press at the right time to block attacks or like something. And I'm not trying to be overly cynical here. Obviously there is some degree of strategy to it. Your performance will be based upon your creature's stats, which are determined by its parts, but the creature creator isn't nearly complex enough to make this phase of the game feel as fleshed out as I think it should. The core mechanic of this phase, like the cell stage, is evolution. You upgrade your creature to better be suited for what lies ahead of you, but unlike on the cell stage, you're not encouraged to be strategic with how you design your creature. For reference, on the cell stage, the specific placement of parts will affect how you play the game. The way you design your creature isn't just aesthetic, it has to be tactical. But on the creature stage, it doesn't matter at all where you put anything. It won't affect how your creature fights or interacts with others at all. All you're actually incentivized to do is replace the worst parts with better parts as you unlock them. I think this creature designer really could have benefited from a little bit more complexity. What if the amount of legs on your creature increased its running speed, or the amount of arms on it changed its fighting style? What if adding a stinger to your creature's tail meant you could attack while facing the other way? Or have a cool spinning attack? What if the limbs had actual weight to them, meaning you had to be mindful as to where you placed them, as opposed to how it is in the actual game where you can put all of a creature's limbs on one side of it and it won't get weighed down? Why not integrate certain mechanics like sneak into how you design your creature? Like if you made your creature a similar hue to its surroundings, maybe that would give it the ability to camouflage, making it easier to sneak up on prey. Why does the way your creature actually looks have no bearing on the gameplay in an evolution simulator? I think that's the core of the problem here. Spore never really lives up to its reputation as an evolution simulator because it isn't really one. Think about what evolution actually is in a nature setting. It's survival of the fittest. Over a long period of time, a species takes on certain characteristics out of necessity, characteristics that are determined by its surroundings. Sure, you change your creature, but at the end of the day, the way it looks is entirely determined by you and what you as its intelligent creator want it to look like. You are God and your word goes. Because of that, Spore is arguably closer to being a game about creationism. Again, that's fine, I'm not against a sandbox mode that allows you to design any kind of creature you want, but I don't think that's all we should have gotten. The base game should have actually taken your creature's design into account and forced you to think more strategically about what changes to make. These are just some of the things that I think could have made the creature stage feel a lot more rewarding with each evolutionary cycle. By the way, if you're unlucky, the game will spawn your nest in the middle of the ocean, and every time you try to walk onto land, you will immediately die, effectively soft locking your save file. That's the first of many game-breaking glitches that we're going to talk about. But for all the issues that plague the creature stage, at least you automatically respawn when you die without losing any progress. The same cannot be said for the tribal stage. From this point on, if you die, you'll have to load your most recent save, so try not to die. I think this is the least well-liked of the 5 stages, and for good reason. It can be very unfair. Sometimes 2 tribes will attack you at once, and it's very, very difficult to defend yourself, and in some cases, impossible, and you will just die. The stage is fairly unbalanced as well. It's clearly easier to play as a pacifist than a conqueror, as all you have to do is make instruments, pop out some babies to play them, and then go play them. Oh yeah, and on the topic of making babies, there's a glitch that allows you to pop out infinite babies for free by changing the graphics settings while the egg is partway through its hatching animation. This will reset the animation and spawn a new egg free of charge. You can do this infinitely. This was never patched out because EA didn't feel like it. They were having a long day, okay? The Civ stage feels a little more fleshed out for sure, but the gameplay can still be diffuse. Unsurprisingly, it's far easier to play as a merchant than a warlord. Also, when playing on a high difficulty, if you don't act fast at the beginning and your opponents grow too strong, you may end up locked into a stalemate that's pretty much unwinnable. Now, this wouldn't be a huge problem if you could reload older saves, but for some reason, the game doesn't let you do that. So if you make the mistake of saving the game right before an enemy tribe or civilization pulls up out of nowhere and takes your capital, the game will automatically load your most recent save, and should that save be too close to your death to do anything about it, you'll get locked into an endless loop of defeat, effectively bricking your game. Memories came flooding back to me of having to abandon my planet and start a new save file as a kid because I got locked into a death loop on the civilization stage. I wasn't planning on taking any chances this time around, especially since I was playing on hard, so I tracked down where the save files are stored on my computer and manually backed them up pretty much every stage. And believe me, this came in handy. How could they make such an obvious design error? I know this game is old, but it's not that old. They would have had to have known it was possible to end up with an unwinnable save point, right? Was it a design choice? Why would you ever want that in your game? It's such a shame too, because there are a lot of things I like about the design of the Civ stage. Not the tribal stage though, that one can suck my dick. When I was a kid, the Civ stage was my first experience playing a strategy-based war game, other than Risk, I guess, and I loved it, despite the frustration of having to abandon my planet and start anew. It's what got me into Sid Meier's Civilization, which is now one of my favorite games, but revisiting it all these years later, its flaws become a lot more apparent. And then we get to the space stage, the meat of Spore. The best stage for sure, but is it good? Well, parts of it definitely are. I definitely enjoy terraforming to an extent. And it's always fun to, ravage the home worlds of dissenters. These guys keep pillaging my planets. Sure would be a shame if someone showed up and oops, dropped my gravitation wave. It's okay guys, I got you. But like all the other stages, there are some unfortunate fatal flaws in its design. The whole stage is built around making money so you can purchase upgrades and better weapons or buy the favor of surrounding civilizations, and the way you do this is by trading spice. Only problem is that the spice your colonies produce doesn't automatically get deposited into your inventory. Instead, you have to painstakingly fly to each and every one of your planets one by one to pick up its spice, which isn't a problem early in the stage when you only have a few planets, but later on when you've colonized entire galaxies, it's not fun, and it gets tedious very quickly even if you only stop at the planets that produce the most spice, assuming that you can remember which ones they are. To be fair, this ceases to be as much of an issue when you discover the actual strategy to the space stage, which is to find planets with purple spice, the most valuable type, and spam down as many cities and storage units onto them as you can. And once you have a reliable, steady flow of purple spice coming your way, you can pretty much just ignore every other planet you encounter for the rest of the game because they don't matter anymore. Then there's the final segment of the game where you have to get past the dreaded Groks in order to see what's at the center of the galaxy, which is possibly the most frustrating segment of any game ever. Basically, you have to navigate an invisible maze full of dead ends you can't see while you're constantly being shot at. I don't know if I got unlucky or what, but I spent almost an hour trying to find the path that led to the center of the galaxy. I died over and over and over again until I eventually found it, and then died the second before I entered the wormhole to the end of the game. Fucking finally. Oh my god. Did I just make it in? What the fuck? Are you serious? I got the achievement for getting into the wormhole, but I didn't actually get in, guys. Alright, that's cool. Unfortunately, this stage has another fatal game-breaking flaw. The crashes. They come when you least expect them, and usually when you haven't saved for a long time. Oh, and did I mention this game doesn't have an autosave feature? Unlike on the prior 2 stages where saving can be a death sentence, here you better make a habit of doing it every 5 minutes, cause you never know when the glitch gremlin's gonna strike. And speaking of glitches in general, they're also a huge problem on this stage. Oh. Oh, there it goes. That's not coming back. I cannot leave. I cannot leave the planet until the colony reaches the ground, but it will never reach the ground because it's flying through the stratosphere at 1,000 miles per hour, so I'm just stuck here, I guess. Multiple times I got trapped on a planet due to some glitch, and since the game doesn't let you save when you're on a planet, I had to exit without saving and lose a bunch of progress. Spore, I love ya, but sometimes I think you were designed in a lab to test the limits of human patience. Beyond even these obvious design flaws, there are some more underlying parts of Spore that have puzzled me since pretty much the first time I played it. When playing this game as a kid, I remember thinking to myself, why do you lose the ability to freely walk around after the creature stage? They took the time to create an entire framework for how your creature controls, moves, fights, and interacts with its surroundings, and then they only used it for 1/5 of their game, if even that. It's like the entire first act of the game is dedicated to designing a creature, and then that design doesn't actually matter at all once you pass a certain point, which is quite lame. While playing the space stage, I remember yearning for the ability to get out of my ship and walk around freely on the surface of foreign planets, but I couldn't. Okay, to be fair, technically after playing the stage for a while, you do gain the ability to beam down a giant hologram version of yourself to a planet's surface. But it's lame. You move at a snail's pace and you can't interact with anyone or anything. All you can do is walk around awkwardly for a bit and then beam back up to your ship. It feels less like a mechanic of the game and more like an afterthought. I want to go on a space adventure, damn it. I want to fight rival aliens and collect specimens and shit. And again, you could very well beat the entire game without ever knowing about this ability, as I did for my first time, because it requires so much playtime to unlock. And yes, I know about that one DLC pack. We'll get there in a bit, just hold your horses. The fact of the matter is, by the time the space stage rolls around, you've actively lost the ability to use the majority of mechanics the game previously taught you. For example, on the civilization stage, you gain the ability to command armies consisting of various types of troops. You also get to design these troops yourself, meaning you can choose whether you want to prioritize defense, offense, or speed. This means you can be strategic about how you attack cities. Do you want to charge in guns blazing, or attack with slow and powerful tanks? Coastal cities are obviously more vulnerable to boats, but planes are far better at dealing with cities that are already well defended. Dropping a bomb right before your attack can make it easier to capture a city, but you could alternatively use that bomb to wipe out a large section of your enemy's troops. Sure, compared to something like Sid Meier's Civilization, it's pretty basic, but I think it's just fleshed out enough that it can still be enjoyable to people who enjoy strategy games, especially if you play it on the highest difficulty. Actually, only if you play it on the highest difficulty, it's way too easy otherwise. Then on the space stage, all of this gets chucked in the bin, and you capture cities by flying over them and then spam clicking them a bunch. In general, I always found it bizarre that on the final stage of the game, your empire has no army. Like, talk about ludonarrative dissonance. I'm supposed to believe that my civilization is the most powerful in the universe, and yet I've literally been the only one expanding our empire single-handedly. Where is everyone else? It is possible to bring some allies to tag along with you when you're attacking a city or defending one of your own, but it has to be a ship from a different civilization, and they tend to die pretty quickly once you get into tough combat. Why not preserve the system of combat from the game's previous stage? Why not have it so players can deploy troops onto a planet which will attack cities for them? Why give players a little taste of a fleshed out combat system, but then scrap it when they progress to the next section of the game? This all underlines my main criticism of Spore, one which has been lingering in the back of my mind since I was a child, even if back then I suppressed it by choosing to only see the game's positives. Why do the game stages feel so separated? Why give players abilities and then strip them away? I know the whole pitch of Spore was that it was like 5 different games in one, but when it comes down to it, taken on its own, each one of these stages is just a watered down version of other better games in its genre. Spore doesn't really feel like 5 different games combined into one, it feels like playing 5 different games sequentially. Wouldn't it feel more cohesive if you only ever gained abilities as the game progressed? Imagine if there was a way to freely walk around during each and every stage. If you could still send delegations to your neighbors on the civilization stage the way you can on the tribal one. If you could still command trading vehicles on the space stage like you can on the civilization one, eliminating the need to stop at every single planet you've colonized one by one just to pick up your spice. Let's compare Spore to No Man's Sky for a minute. That game starts out similarly, minus the cell stage, in that you control a character who explores an alien planet and interacts with its wildlife. However, over the next few hours of gameplay, you'll unlock all kinds of new abilities that'll change the way you can play the game, like the ability to blast off into space and explore other planets, the ability to trade with and take missions from other civilizations, the ability to have dogfights with space pirates, and this is all sounding a little bit familiar, isn't it? No Man's Sky feels like a seamless combination of Spore's creature stage and its space stage. Unlike Spore, nothing gets taken away from you as you progress. You only gain new abilities and methods of exploration. That's not to say that No Man's Sky is the exact same type of game as Spore, because it's not, but I think it does serve as an indicator of a mere fraction of what Spore could have been. And when I say that, I'm fully aware that Spore came out in 2008. It could never have reached the same scale of No Man's Sky, but even so, with some significant tweaks to its design, I think it could have felt just as, if not more, exciting, especially for its time. And if EA had gone ahead with the game's potential sequels, well, we'll never know just how big the world of Spore could have gotten. Okay, so let's back up for a moment. There was a lot more to the story of Spore than we've covered. We've talked about the end result, but we haven't delved into how it came to be and why it ended up the way that it did. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's finally time to talk about Will Wright.
So the process of designing a game is very much like climbing up a tree. Every branch is a potential decision point, a different way the design can go. We're getting better and better at knowing which branches we should take, what fundamental dynamics are more entertaining, more fun to play with.
You see, Will is the guy who came up with the idea for Spore, and he was the one leading its development at Maxis. However, many see him as more than just a mere game designer. His most diehard fans see him as a visionary. This is the guy responsible not only for Spore, but The Sims and SimCity, 2 of the most groundbreaking simulation games ever. Despite what you may think of them in today's gaming climate, these games were revolutionary when they came out. For starters, these games were made with one thing in mind: player freedom. Rather than railroading players towards specific, clear-cut objectives like most strategy games, SimCity and The Sims both allow players to do basically whatever the hell they want and set their own goals. Or in other words, they're some of the earliest sandbox games. That's not to say that there are no objectives built into these games, because there absolutely are. Like, if you want to keep playing The Sims, at the bare minimum, you have to keep them alive. And it may be fun to destroy part of your city with Godzilla, but if you do that too much, you won't really have anything left to play with. These games teach us not only that we're all sociopathic monsters deep down, but that if we want to get anywhere, we have to learn how to tame the monster. After all, inside all of us, there are 2 wolves. The one that wants to drown your sim, and the one that wants the achievement for your sim becoming a famous rock star. Which one will win? Each and every player chooses how they want to play the game, even if that means destroying everything they've built just because it's fun. Half of The Sims' current player base is just people who want to watch their own creations be trapped within living nightmares because it's funny to watch the world burn. That's why we're doing it in real life. In essence, Will Wright was aiming to create digital playgrounds for players to frolic around in. The Sims is more so designed to be a tool for creativity than it is meant to be a traditional game. In fact, Will Wright refers to his creations as toys rather than games for this very reason.
When I was a kid, I actually attended Montessori school up to 6th grade in Atlanta, Georgia. And she would design these toys where kids, in playing with the toys, would actually come to understand these deep principles of life and nature through play. And since they discovered those things, it really stuck with them. them so much more. And also they would experience their own failures. There was a failure-based aspect to learning there that was very important. And it wasn't until later as I started making games that I really actually think of them more as toys. People call me a game designer, but I really think of these things more as toys.
With this in mind, it was upon wrapping production of The Sims that Will Wright first pitched the idea of Spore to his colleagues. They had already created a toy that allowed gamers to play around with their own digital people. But what about a toy that went beyond people? What about a toy that encompassed everything else? And thus a new project called Sim Everything was born, later renamed to Spore. On March 7th, 2005, the 5th Annual Game Developers Conference kicked off, giving the game community at large a chance to see what their favorite and not so favorite developers were up to. One of the developers slated to present was EA, and with the runaway success of franchises such as Madden, FIFA, and The Sims under their belt, I think it's safe to say that the studio had built up something of a reputation for simulation games. EA was the company that took boring and mundane life events and turned them into debatably exciting video games. Finally, gamers could know what it was like to clean the house and do the laundry. And then drown. They weren't the kind of company known for putting out titles that allowed players to explore fantasy worlds alternative to our own, so when people saw that Will Wright was slated to give a talk about the future of content, I doubt anyone could have anticipated what was coming.
Also want to apologize for the title of this talk and the description, which I know was kind of hopelessly vague. This year when they asked me what I was going to talk about, I just flat out lied. So I'm not really going to talk about the future of content. I'm really more in fact going to talk about a possible future of content. We've seen that players love making content. Time and time again, every time we've given the players the opportunity to make content, they've just gone crazy with it. Probably a more accurate title of this talk is what I learned about content from The Sims, why it's driven me to procedural methods, and what I now plan to do with them. Okay, we start here, and we're in the land of the very small. Now, the walking you see here is all procedurally generated based upon an analysis of the skeleton that you created. One of the landmarks is I've always been fascinated with the idea of monkeys with guns. And I don't know why, but just what happens when you give monkeys guns, it's just, there's something cool about that.
A chimp with a machine gun, what a joke.
For what it's worth, I love listening to Will Wright talk about stuff he's worked on. It's kind of like listening to Jeff Goldblum talk about game design for a while. It's very zen.
I call him Buttface.
And by the way, it's extremely lucky that this footage even still exists. This very well could have been lost to time. Shout out to Zeus Monomon for posting a 4K upscale of it on YouTube. Now, putting the actual finished product aside, this demo goes fucking hard, even by today's standards. A part of me is getting excited just by watching this video, even though I know that the game's been out for nearly 17 years, and is nothing like this.
Now this is the point at which I am overtly browsing other players' worlds, okay? So this entire world was created by another player. There goes my reputation as a non-violent game developer.
Back in the day, people were genuinely excited for this game. It was probably one of the most anticipated games of the year.
People got on their feet, gave them like a 5-minute standing ovation because the idea was just so startling and fresh, and they all got it.
It was complete mayhem. We had people coming up to us going, "Are you really making that?"
You have to remember, back in the 2000s, EA didn't quite have the terrible reputation with gamers that it has now. Back then, the public actually had some amount of faith in EA, so when they promised to release a game this cool, a lot of people believed them. So fast forward a few years, and as you can imagine, anticipation was at an all-time high, especially once EA kicked the marketing department into gear.
Someone looked at a microbe and thought he could use a longer flagella and a pair of pinchers too. Yeah. So someone looked at our hero and said he needs to be able to defend himself. And voila!
In an ingenious marketing move, before the game was even out, Maxis released the Creature Creator online for free so that you could get a taste of the game's customizable features. And it absolutely blew the fuck up. Everyone loved the Creature Creator, even those who hadn't heard of Spore before, and they wanted more. According to Spore's official YouTube channel, even celebrities were in on the action, with the cast of The Flight of the Conchords and Stan Lee, among others, making their very own creatures. They also got the one and only Robin Williams to play the game in front of a live crowd.
This is basically a creature that can do coke from a mile away.
And they got legendary producer Brian Eno to create a procedurally generated soundtrack for the game. Because, this game's theme was procedural generation, and he did so by making use of something called the shuffler, which rearranged predetermined notes and samples into a random order. And you know what? It's fucking iconic. I could listen to that all day. The hype train was chugging forth at full throttle, but ultimately all of this merely served to generate buzz. What really mattered was the game itself. After 3 long, hard years of waiting, tempered by nothing but endless Sims 2 DLC packs, Spore finally hit shelves on September 4th, 2008. Finally, the world at large could get a taste of Will Wright's vision. Except there was one small problem. His vision had clearly been diluted. And to everyone's astonishment, the game was met with a resounding meh. The game's launch was also hampered by an infamous anti-piracy software called SecureROM, which limited installation to a maximum of 3 devices, but frequently interpreted any changes in hardware as constituting a new device, causing players who tinker with their computers to run out of install credits very quickly and be unable to play the game they had legally purchased. Oh, that and the fact that it was also accused of being borderline malware that installed itself onto users' computers in such a way that it could never be removed no matter how hard they tried, leading to a class action lawsuit against EA? Not great publicity. Ironically, this anti-piracy software is part of what led to Spore becoming the most pirated game of all time. It's also worth mentioning that within days of Spore's disastrous launch, EA's stock value completely tanked and didn't recover for about 6 years. And this may have been partially due to that whole recession that was happening at the time, but this may have been largely responsible. And even if it wasn't, I think it's probably safe to say that a lot of higher-ups at EA blamed Spore for the loss in stock value, even though it wasn't the game's fault. It was their fault for all the stupid decisions they made. But anyways, it didn't really do much to help the game's future. Wow, that seemed like a very obviously foolhardy and preventable issue. I sure hope the higher-ups at EA learned their lesson from this fiasco. But enough about the launch. How about the game itself? I mean, I suppose the core mechanics are basically the same as what had been promised. Mostly. But everything else looks completely redone, and, more importantly, slightly lamer. Why does the creature creator from the demo seem so much more fleshed out than the one in the finished game? Why did the demo seem to have a more complicated physics engine than what was actually released? What happened to the blood? I want to see creatures bleed, damn it. And what happened to all the stuff Will Wright was talking about here?
Now, these things are built out of functional parts that actually have meaning to the guy, in terms of how he's going to behave and live in this world. Now, the way he's fighting is based upon where I put his weapon, which is on his tail. So you can see, if I'm not close enough, it won't hit. So I basically have to chase. Luckily, I'm faster than this guy. Oh, there we go.
I just got finished going on about how the creature stage would have been better, in my opinion, if it placed more importance upon how you actually design your creature physically, and here's Will Wright directly saying that the game, at one point in its development, was going to do exactly that.
Now, the way he's fighting is based upon where I put his weapon.
But all of that was scrubbed. It's like the whole game was downsized, and I'm sure a lot of this demo was pre-rendered and scripted ahead of time, don't get me wrong, but even so, it's clear from watching this that a lot of work that had already been completed was later scrapped. The amount of features that seem to have been abandoned is staggering. I won't list them all one by one, but I will put them all on screen for a second. Probably the most noticeable difference between the demo and the actual game is the fact that it has an entire extra stage. Oh wait, sorry, just let me check my notes for a second. Oh yeah, I meant to say it has 2 entire extra stages, bringing the grand total up to 7. A pretty significant change. These cut phases are the aquatic stage and the city stage. The former would have been essentially a hybrid between the cell stage and the creature stage, where you swim around and explore the ocean, evading the sharp teeth of larger fish along the way.
So this is a bit later in the game. We've actually gone now from a 2D to a 3D environment. And now, rather than living in a little drop of water, we're living kind of under the ocean.
And the latter would have been a city manager, which, in Will Wright's own words, was akin to a simplified version of SimCity.
Eventually, I upgrade it to the next level, which is the city game. Now, at this level, we're basically playing a very, very simple version of SimCity. I can, decide what buildings to make them. I build roads. They have needs.
In the final game, there is a bit of an awkward jump between the tribal stage, where your people are basically cavemen, to an advanced modern society. The city stage would have bridged that gap, allowing you to guide your species through the mistake that was the Industrial Revolution and its consequences. Also, the jump from the cell stage to the creature stage is a bit odd. You go from a cell to a giant cell with legs attached to it, which is conceptually a little unnerving. The removal of these stages seems to have had negative ripple effects throughout the rest of the game. Being that you spend a chunk of the early game underwater, originally it was planned for an entirely alternative route where you could keep your creature underwater, meaning there would have been underwater versions of the creature, tribal, and presumably civilization stages. It also means that on the space stage you would have been able to construct cities underwater.
This, by the way, is also what I would get if I were to build, at this point, a city underwater. So at this point, this level of technology, I can start colonizing the oceans on my home planet, and they would have bubbles as well.
But alas, this was never to be. Likewise, after the city stage was removed, the concept of city construction was sanded down to its bare minimum. Watching over this demo footage today fills me with a strange kind of sadness, knowing I'll never get to play the fully realized version of the game that existed inside Will Wright's head. And it would seem that the comments under this video agree with me. Luckily for us, our glimpses of what Spore looked like in its early days don't end with GDC 2005. Over the next few years, Max has continued to show off the game every now and again, providing us with a window as to how it took shape. Shout out to Gold Medal Sonic for posting a 4K upscale of the 2006 E3 build of the game, you legend. In this version of the game, we see a creature stage that seems to have a mechanic where you have to protect your eggs from predators, which I really think would have helped make the gameplay here feel a lot more spontaneous and less formulaic. We also get a good glimpse of what seems to be a more fleshed out tribal stage and the city stage in all of its glory. Just look at how big and voluptuous and customizable that city looks. It's beautiful. I never want to even look at the tiny little shitty cities we ended up with ever again. And though we have no way of knowing for sure, it kind of looks like mechanics from the tribal stage, such as construction of huts and tools, would have remained in play during the city stage and perhaps even further on, which I think would be cool. In this build, we also got to see all kinds of scrapped ideas like the hut editor, the flora editor, agriculture mechanics, all things that would have served to give the game the polish it so desperately needed. Spore was so anticipated during this time that Will Wright gave a TED Talk about it before it was even out and previewed a later build of the game. Oh, and no, I'm not 100% sure why he has a cyborg arm during this presentation.
And now because I'm actually the one here, I can actually, if I want to, get out of the UFO and walk up, and they should be worshiping me at this point as a god. At first they're a little freaked out.
What? You could actually beam down to planets in the beta? And you could actually interact with the world? Why was this removed? I don't understand. What the fuck? Some of this removed content is still available within the game's files if you look hard enough, which would seem to imply it was removed from the game fairly late in production, a theory corroborated by many of those online who claim to have worked on it. I mean, some of the game's trailers still make reference to the aquatic stage. Fun fact, you can actually re-enable a bunch of unused parts on the cell stage that are still within the game's files by launching the game with a special command, which is cool, but why couldn't they have just, been in the game properly? More evidence that the game was still undergoing extensive changes late in its production is the fact that the free version of the creature creator works differently from the one in the actual game. In the demo, ability levels stack additively, which is to say that if you equip multiple parts that each boost the same ability, their effects will combine. So if you were to hypothetically create a creature with one pair of feet that has level 3 dance and another pair that has level 2 dance, that would add up to a combined total of level 5 dance. But in the full game, it doesn't work that way. Instead, Instead, only the highest individual part determines your final ability level, so that same creature from the example I just gave would only have level 3 dance. On top of that, a lot of parts have had their ability stats shifted around. The best way to demonstrate how different these creators are from one another is to make a creature in the demo and then bring it over to the actual game and look at just how different its stats are now. You'd think it's a completely different creature. And remember, the creature creator came out a matter of months before the final game. It's actually been confirmed by one of Spore's lead designers that constraints were placed on the editor to make it far more rudimentary than it could have been, so that there was no chance of it confusing players. Now that you all have some idea of just how much content was cut from Spore's final release, I'm sure you all have one burning question on your mind. What happened? Okay, so the production of Spore, it was a rocky road for a litany of reasons. There were some technical snags here and there, like the development of the game's procedural generation system, and figuring out a way to somehow create walk cycles and animations that would work with every possible type of creature simultaneously. Spoiler alert, that's not easy.
You don't know who your actor is. It might have 8 arms, it might have 8 legs, it could have 3 heads, 7 mouths, we don't know. But you have to make an animation and a system that will accommodate whatever the character is, whatever the player comes up with, the animation has to work. You play that same animation on them, and you try to see, okay, can we tell that they're jumping? Can we tell that they're clapping? Can we tell that they're laughing?
However, these issues were all solved one way or another, and contrary to popular belief, it really doesn't seem like the game was scaled back in any significant way as a result of the technical limitations of the time.
As of maybe 20 years ago, I really never felt terribly constrained by technology. But at some point it just became, okay, the only limitation really is my imagination.
So with something like Spore, you were literally, it's like, there was no limit. The
animation system on Spore was like a huge technical challenge. We had to kind of make sure we could nail that first. Yeah. But the rest of that was just brute force, really,
So if it wasn't the fault of technology, then whose fault was it? Let's weigh up the evidence. Many individuals have been accused of tampering with Spore during its development over the years, but the name I've seen come up more than any other is Chris Hecker. So, who is Chris Hecker, and why does he keep getting blamed for ruining Spore? Well, he's a programmer who played an integral role in the creation of the game's procedural animation system.
Chris Hecker was brought in to work on the animation system, which probably was the single hardest technical problem we faced in Spore.
That is to say that if it weren't for him, they may not have figured out how to make your weird-looking creature walk properly. But despite this, a lot of people accused him of having ruined the game after he gave an interview in which he claimed to be the founding member of the game's Cute team.
Chris Hecker was having strong misgivings about how appealing all this hard science would be to the wider world. I was the founding member of the Cute team, he says with pride. Ocean, Quigley, Spore's art director, and Will were really the founding members of the science team. Ocean would make the Cell game look exactly like a petri dish with all these 2-scale animals, and Will would say, "That's the greatest thing I've ever seen," and some of us were thinking, "I'm not sure about that."
Ah yes, the infamous Cute versus Science debate. Basically, without getting into too much detail, the design team pretty much split into 2 factions, the Science team and the Cute team. The Science team, led by Will Wright, had originally envisioned the game as being a true-to-life evolution simulator, whereas the Cute team wanted to make it more, cute, adding googly eyes to the cells, adding humor to the cutscenes, that kind of stuff.
And I actually realized that cells don't have eyes, but it helps make it cute.
There was some amount of friendly rivalry between these 2 camps, but I think it's been massively overblown in hindsight by people who think that there was some kind of war going on between the science people and the cute people. And I'm not here to disagree with anyone's opinion on what the game's aesthetic should have been, but if you think it was Chris Hecker who's responsible for ruining Spore, you are wrong. Pushing for a cuter aesthetic is not the same thing as oversimplifying the game's mechanics.
Since it just seems to keep reanimating like a really bad zombie movie, even though it's been called nonsense by me, executive producer Lucy Bradshaw, and Will Wright, I will simply state clearly that at no point did I try to steer the game towards a simplistic, shallow, or casual design.
And Chris has gone on record numerous times since the game's release to say that he was ultimately disappointed with how shallow the gameplay ended up being.
I think Spore failed to fully explore the mechanic of what we called editor consequence. And even though I worked on that game for 6 years, I would have worked on it longer if we could have made the game it should have been. It's about depth, not time invested.
I spent 6 years on a game that did not explore its fundamental mechanic to its aesthetic conclusions. Editor consequence in Spore, I would have worked on Spore for longer.
It might be true that certain others, who we'll talk about in a moment, who were responsible for watering down the game's mechanics, also liked the cute aesthetic because they thought it would make the game more marketable, but that's not Chris Hecker's fault. He very clearly didn't want the game to be simplified. But despite this, Chris was harassed for ruining Spore for years. I have read through forum upon forum and even seen articles from game journalists blaming him for what happened, and it is total bullshit. Like, he wasn't even on the game's creative team. Like, he didn't ruin Spore. It wasn't Chris Hecker, I promise, guys. So if not Chris, who? Was it Will Wright? I mean, Will was the game's lead creative director, so logic stands to reason that he may have been responsible for how it turned out. Whilst I won't say that it's impossible that these changes came from him, I am really inclined to doubt it. I mean, it just seems to contradict everything he said about the game during its development. What happened to it being a boundless toy meant to teach evolution and let player creativity run wild? Nah, something fishy's going on here. Somebody is to blame. So who is it? Was it the guy who took off his belt in the meetings?
The spine should be just like my belt. And I whipped my belt off and I slapped it down on the table.
Yeah, it was you, wasn't it, you son of a bitch? Truthfully, I don't actually think it's that productive to look for one specific individual who's responsible for ruining Spore. The process of creating a game is complicated, and ultimately compromises will have to be made on the part of the creatives, especially in an ambitious product such as this. That's not to say, however, that there's no culprit, because there is. It's just that Spore's true killer has no face. Because Spore's killer was no man, but rather a serial killing beast with an appetite for the flesh of innocent games. Its trademark, 2 letters stamped onto the bloated corpses of its victims. EA. I mean, you saw the title of the video. You knew that I was eventually going to blame EA. We've gotten to that point. Around this time, EA had been developing a philosophy of game design that centered around simplicity and accessibility. They wanted to make games that just about anybody could pick up and put down, having felt like it had something for them. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it quickly became clear that this philosophy clashed with the plans for Spore, what was meant to be a deeply complex game. Many suspect that features Will and his original team had wanted were either deemed too expensive to produce or too complicated for the average Neanderthalic gamer to wrap their dumb heads around. Thus, not only were features cut, but many features that had already been finished were watered down, like the creature creator, geography editor, terraforming, diplomacy, and much, much more. And that's not even including the entire stages that were cut. It also seems like parts of the game that were near completion may have been removed with the express intention of selling them back to the consumer as DLC packs. The aquatic stage, for instance, was only removed from the game with the promise it would one day be released as a DLC pack. But this never happened. Most of the planned DLC packs never happened, leaving Spore a husk of what it could have been. When you look at the way EA higher-ups, like Lucy Bradshaw for instance, talk about Spore, it's pretty clear they wanted to turn it into a game that had mass appeal, so that, you know, when they introduce the microtransactions, they'd get as much money as possible. But of course, ideas don't just spawn from thin air. Somebody is responsible for pivoting EA in this direction. I mean, who was steering the ship when Spore came out anyways? Well, it was a man named John Riccitiello. And boy, do I have a lot to say about him. John Riccitiello is something of a legend amongst the gaming community, not for being a good CEO, but a spectacularly shit one. He joined the company in the 90s, but he was only CEO between the years of 2007 and 2013, which isn't a super long time, but it was still long enough to completely tarnish their reputation. Let's run through some of his greatest hits, shall we? It was John who pushed for EA to shift over to making online-only games, meaning you would need a steady internet connection at all times to play. Even a slight hiccup in your Wi-Fi or in EA servers would disconnect you from the game and cause you to lose progress. This was very infamously forced upon everybody who tried to play 2013's SimCity. Unfortunately for everybody involved, EA servers weren't capable of hosting the volume of people who tried to play the game upon its launch, leading to a a crash which rendered the game completely unplayable. This meant that the majority of people who bought the game couldn't play it at all for the first week. Even when the servers were back up, players would have to wait in a queue before they were able to play. They had to wait in a queue to play a single-player city builder game. What the fuck? And even when the servers were back up, things still weren't working correctly for anyone.
Day one, you had a huge 13 gigabyte update, which I've heard is just the whole game.
Look at this traffic. You can't see it half the time, because half the time you can't get the game to load because of server overload.
Been trying to play the past couple days and I haven't been able to get in, but you know, it's been out a month now, so I should be able to play it. Oh no, I need an invite, but I've already been invited to this fucking region. And the guy running the invite actually got in this morning and sent me more invites to all these claims and I still can't get in them.
Also, sometimes the servers would glitch and randomly roll back your city to a previous version, causing you to lose potentially days of progress. Nothing you could do about that. These issues contributed to SimCity having one of the most disastrous launches in gaming history and completely nuking the entire franchise to a point that it hasn't had a new game in 12 years.
This is what I think of Peter Moore, EA, and their bullshit games when they rip us off.
If this already sounds kind of bad to you, believe me, we're just getting started. Under John's leadership, EA became notorious for rushing games out as quickly as possible, compromising both quality and functionality. Of course, there's SimCity, which was its own disaster, but there was also Medal of Honor, Mass Effect 3, Dead Space 3, Command & Conquer 4, all games that people feel were rushed out and or ruined by studio interference. John is infamous for being the guy that pivoted EA towards stuffing their games with microtransactions. As I'm sure you know, in the early 2010s, EA's reputation was pretty much obliterated by the company's insistence on forcing microtransactions into every nook and cranny of their games. It wasn't enough that you'd already legally purchased their game. No, EA wanted to squeeze its users for every last penny. And it's mostly this guy's fault. He once infamously pitched, and I'm not joking here, that Battlefield players should be made to pay $1 every time they want to reload their guns.
When you are 6 hours into playing Battlefield and you run out of ammo in your clip and we ask you for $1 to reload, you're really not very price sensitive at that point in time.
This guy ran one of the biggest gaming companies in the world. He's also behind EA's failed attempt to rival Steam with Origin, another disastrous rushed launch that cost the company dearly. Without even getting into the issues with the app itself, part of the push towards Origin involved EA pulling all its games from Steam, which, in hindsight, likely cost them countless sales since, you know, Origin never really caught on the way Steam did. So, is that it? Nope. Under his management, EA's stock value completely crashed and didn't recover until shortly after he left. During his tenure, EA was also voted the worst company in America twice. And he was only there for 6 years. He's also quoted as saying that game developers are some of the biggest fucking idiots, having spent much of his time as CEO wrestling with them for creative control over their work. He had fairly poor working relations with most of the creatives that operated under him, and he eventually pissed off one of them so badly that they went on to make a game featuring a parody of him as the antagonist. It never ends with this guy. The SimCity fiasco was pretty much the last straw for stockholders who pressured him to step down that very same month, and he almost immediately somehow landed another gig as the CEO of Unity. How did he get this job? I don't know, but it seems like he's finally learned his lesson when it comes to corporate greed and is content to just run a company normally. Just kidding. In 2023, he tried to implement a new rule forcing developers to fork over up to 20 cents to Unity every time somebody downloads one of their games. Yes, you heard right. Developers would lose money from their games being downloaded. Now, 20 cents may not sound like much at first, but when you multiply that by millions of downloads, it is. Not only would this be ridiculously expensive for indie developers, but there were no safeguards in place to protect them against spam. Using virtual machines, somebody could theoretically install and uninstall somebody's game over and over and over again, racking up an insane bill. This idea was so stupid that it destroyed Unity's reputation pretty much overnight. The company still has not recovered, and John was once again forced to resign as CEO. Earlier this year, Bobby Kotick, the former CEO of Activision Blizzard, which which is one of EA's main rivals, publicly called John the worst CEO in video games and said he would have paid for him to remain as CEO forever. And all of that's not even mentioning the sexual lawsuit filed against him by the company's former vice president. This guy is just immune to good press. John is one of those celebrities who, when you open their Twitter profile, the first thing you see is an apology tweet. How classy. Okay, with all this in mind, I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that all of this paints the picture of a not very good CEO. I also don't think it's a stretch to say that maybe John might have meddled with the production of Spore. I mean, let's examine the timeline here. Based on most accounts I can find from people who worked on the game, the last year of Spore's development was a mad dash to get the game out, and anything that wasn't already at least 90% finished was cut. John became the CEO of EA in 2007, a year before Spore's release. And we know that John took a keen interest in Spore from the first day of his employ. Now that certainly seems incriminating, but here's the thing. Spore was actually originally supposed to come out in 2007. Believe it or not, John gave the game an extra year of development time, which was really nice of him. It went from having not even close to enough time to be finished to still not enough time to be finished, but at least the game's kind of held together by glue now.
Oh, God! All right, that's it. You know, that's it.
Truth be told, from the research I've done, it seems like the game was not in a shippable state in 2007, so granting it an extra year was more a necessity than a choice. And if it wasn't clear from playing it, the game really needed another year, maybe years, to be properly finished, but unfortunately it didn't get it. John and other higher-ups like Lucy Bradshaw saw franchising potential in Spore from the jump, and they said as much in interviews. As opposed to the typical case of a studio ruining its own game, the issue isn't that the executives didn't believe in it, but rather that they believed in it too much. Before the game was even out, John was saying stuff like, "I would love to imagine that 2 years from now or a year from now, the debate is whether we need a Spore label inside of EA, because the back-end system works so well we're able to monetize body parts, plant parts, car parts, planets as a way to generate incremental revenue off an install base of several million active users." And if you want an English translation for what that means, it means he wanted to put microtransactions in Spore. Hey, I guess we're lucky that never happened. Whereas games like The Sims were basically left alone by executives who, to be frank, didn't understand it, Spore was meddled with early on because executives thought it would be a money-making machine, and they wanted to make sure it would reach as many people as possible. And in trying to make the game appeal to everybody, they made it appeal to nobody. Okay, that might be a bit harsh, but it certainly didn't appeal to the people that were initially interested in it. Sure, it's possible that EA genuinely convinced Will Wright these changes were in the best interests of the game's success, but at the same time, I think it's entirely believable that Will Wright was resistant to these changes at first behind closed doors, but after years and years of EA pushing for it, he wasn't really left with much of a choice and was made to alter his game for mass appeal. So is that it? Have we got our culprit? Do we finally know why Spore ended up the way it did? Did Will Wright beg and plead for John to show his game mercy only for John to say, "Fuck you, I have the Chaos Emeralds, I'll do what I want"? Well, it's not that simple. Look, I know I keep throwing curveballs here, but life is complicated, and like I said earlier, it would be oversimplifying the matter to say that John Riccitiello is responsible for everything, even if I do think he has a lot of blood on his hands. To be frank, there were some fundamental issues with how this game was developed. I do think it's true that Spore was an extremely ambitious game, and like we touched on briefly before, there wasn't complete consensus from developers on what direction the project should have gone in. Beyond even the cute versus science debate, there doesn't seem to have been a clear consensus from developers whether they were making a game or a toy, which is to say they didn't know whether to prioritize limiting gameplay mechanics or unlimited player freedom. It's important to remember that for a long time the game was being developed by a team of engineers rather than game designers who viewed it as a vehicle for experimentation more so than anything else.
So the core team was, when I got here, was mostly engineers. I think a lot of our technology was in pretty serious development at that time, and I think we had more engineers than any other game developer.
When EA understandably introduced tried and true game designers to the mix who were looking to create an approachable experience, this threw everything off. It also didn't help that the game's 5 different stages were being developed by 5 different teams who perhaps weren't communicating with each other as much as they should have been. A designer who worked on the game, Soren Johnson, writes,
"Each of the 5 stages had different controls, different interfaces, different nouns, different verbs, different goals, and so on. Some effort was made, of course, to share ideas and elements across stages. However, the compromises involved often watered down what was supposed to make each stage distinct in the first place. For example, each stage required a friendly means of engaging with other entities. In the creature stage, this mechanic became dancing for other creatures to make friends, while in the civilization stage, this mechanic translated into attacking other cities with music instead of bullets. Neither mechanic was the best idea for its own individual stage, and the justification was high-level consistency. Thus, the powers of 10 idea put the team in a state of perpetual compromise, where every major decision had to be considered according to its effect across all 5 stages."
Again, if the project had had proper direction and time, I think these issues could have been overcome, and I still very much so think EA management is to blame for a lot of the faults with the final product, but I do think it is worth pointing out for the sake of being fair that they didn't cause literally every problem with the game. And even though I love Will Wright, I have to admit he might be guilty of promising features before they were actually properly in the game. The fact of the matter is, we can never know for certain just how much impact John Riccitiello or Lucy Bradshaw or any of the other executives had over the final product because, as you can imagine, after the game came out, nobody who worked on it wanted to point fingers at their former bosses and, in doing so, torch their own careers. Now, the fact that Will Wright left EA shortly after Spore's release and also later said that he felt the game didn't hang together as well as he'd hoped does make me suspicious he may have harbored some ill will, but like I said earlier, he's never spoken on what happened behind the scenes, so we don't really have too much to go on. What I can say in good confidence is this. We live in a world that rewards corporate greed, encourages it even. CEOs have a remarkable ability to fail upwards while trampling the people beneath them who actually do all the work.
You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it.
In the corporate world, art is nothing more than a commodity to be squeezed for as much profit as it can possibly generate. John Riccitiello wasn't the problem, he was a symptom of a larger problem plaguing the entire gaming industry. Sure, he may have sucked, but a lot of other gaming CEOs still in power today ain't much better. Maybe we should just be happy that the game was allowed to come out at all. A lot of other franchises have had it even worse. Horror fans still haven't recovered from the idiotic cancellation of Silent Hills. Valve fans have been on life support for well over a decade waiting for Gabe Newell to announce any game with 3 in the title. And he never will. It feels like the minute Valve realized that selling games is far more profitable than making them, all their franchises simply ceased to be a priority, even if they ended off on cliffhangers. Remember, this industry, like every other, isn't driven by creativity or quality, it's driven by profit and convenience. And as art forms go, games are some of the most expensive and time-consuming to produce, so studios really don't want to waste money on a misfire. They like playing it safe. Spore wasn't deemed a valuable enough property after the first game was released, and so the franchise was all but abandoned a few years after launch. No more updates, no proper patches to its many glitches, no proper sequels, just 2 DLC packs. So, let's talk about them. Now, the first of these DLC packs was the Cute and Creepy pack, which came out barely a couple months after the game's release. This DLC pack released so shortly after the base game that I'm suspicious its contents was originally supposed to be in the game, but then EA insisted it be chopped out so that they could sell it at an additional fee. Wouldn't be the first time EA's done that. Next was the Galactic Adventures DLC, which actually added some cool new features like the ability to build your own structures, the ability to share access to your planets with other players so they can come see what you've built, which should have already been in the base game in my opinion, but whatever, and the ability to beam down freely to different planets and actually interact with the world. Holy shit! That's what I've always wanted. I can't believe it was here all along and I never knew about it. Okay, so full disclosure, I wasn't planning on buying this DLC pack for the video because I didn't want to give EA any more money than I already have, and I was under the impression that if I wanted to purchase the DLC through Steam, I would have to buy the base game through Steam as well. But then as I was working on the video, lo and behold, both Spore and Galactic Adventures went on a major sale, and I felt compelled by nature to take advantage of it. So I backed up my save file and reinstalled Spore through Steam, this time with the DLC pack, only to realize upon launching it that I'm stupid, and apparently there are more files you have to back up if you want your creations to actually still be part of your save file, meaning I'd effectively just wiped my beautiful Bored Apes from existence. My save file still worked, but my species and buildings had all been replaced by generic default templates. From that day forward, I was forced to play as the Twibblegone Empire. It was possibly one of the saddest days of my life.
Oh my god, I deleted it! Oh my god, I fucking deleted it! Ah! No, no, no! How do I get it back? Oh god, how do I get it back? How do I get it back?
But at least I was reassured by the fact that I would finally get to beam down to planets on the space stage, which is something I'd always wanted to do. Until I tried to. And realized you can't, and you can in fact only beam down to certain predetermined planets that have scripted missions on them, which last for like 3 minutes, and that's it. Well, it's okay, I told myself. This could still be fun as long as the missions are good. Here's a mission where I have to run away while a bunch of enemies I can't see because the camera angle is awful attack me. Here's another mission where I have to do that again, but while escorting an NPC that gets stuck on walls, and you can't leave until she makes it to the end with you, meaning you have to go back and find whatever wall she's stuck on and hope you can get her unstuck.
You suck. Get your ass over here.
And here's one where you have to prevent a war between two rhyming medieval clans by running back and forth between their camps and relaying messages. You guys live like 20 feet from each other, can you just talk it out amongst yourselves? Okay, I want to give credit where it's due. This DLC definitely improves the game. Most saliently, Galactic Adventures reintroduces the importance of creature design to the space stage. On some of these missions, you may have to get into a fight or run away, and the way you designed your creature all those millennia ago actually matters. Having wings, for instance, can be very helpful for some of these missions and actively change the way you approach them. This is good. You can also buy upgrades the more missions you play, which unlock new gadgets you can decorate your captain with, providing you with all new abilities. Unfortunately for me, these Twibblegone fucks I'm forced to play as can barely move, don't have wings, and have virtually no attack ability, rendering them pretty much useless, which is part of why I ditched this save file and played the whole thing again. These missions genuinely help break up the monotony of the space stage once you fall into a rhythm of sell spice, kill infected creatures, buy fuel, put down a colony, rinse and repeat. I also have to give my praise to the level creator, which allows you to make your own missions and post it online for others to play. When messing around with it, I noticed that just barely touching a moving car will kill you instantly.
Alright then.
So naturally I made a level where you have to dodge 100 moving vehicles at once, with the goal being to make anyone that plays it wish that they were getting hit by a car in real life, including me.
Oh my. I hate myself for making this. That's great. Fuck. Alright. No! Jeez! Coast looks clear. Fuck! Get away, get away, get away, get away. Fuck! Are you?
And then I made my roommate play it for good measure.
Oh my god, I forgot to tell you there's a time limit.
And in general, despite the level creator's limits, players still found ways to make very creative and fun levels. They can tend to be a little out there. I think one of the most popular ones is a Vor level, but overall this does add a fun new aspect to the game. Now, having said all that, these missions are still very surface level once you wrap your head around them, like most of the game. They feel more like Roblox levels to me than anything else, and whilst the level creator is cool, you can't actually do very much with it. The ability to construct your own levels is neat, but I think it should have been integrated with the game's city construction mechanics. You should be able to build things within your own cities, and for that matter, you should be able to build things across your entire planet, and there should be some kind of gameplay incentive to do so that connects organically with the base game. It's criminal that once the game finally gives you a complex terrain editor and the ability to freely construct buildings wherever you want, it's not actually part of the game. Now, obviously, that would have been very difficult for the devs to accomplish in one DLC pack released a year later, but that's my point. It shouldn't have been a DLC pack released a year later. Many of these ideas were clearly part of the game's early development, and for whatever reason, they were stripped out. By the time Maxis actually had the chance to add them back in, the game had already shipped, and they became surface-level additions. Had these mechanics been woven into the game from the start, I can only imagine how much more fleshed out they could have felt. You know how much of a ball of a time I would have had planning out the infrastructure of my planet, trying to decide the most strategic places to put roads, putting down armories and mining facilities behind big defensive walls so that invading forces can't get to them in time? Man, I really wish I could play the version of this game that exists inside my head. And as for DLC, that's it. Nothing followed Galactic Adventures. We did get a few half-assed spin-offs for Nintendo consoles, but they weren't anything resembling proper sequels, and none of them were especially well received.
Spore Hero for the Wii, and Spore Hero Arena on Nintendo DS. Fight to save the planet. Use your Wii Remote to unleash killer combos.
Now, unbeknownst to me, my sister actually owned one of these games growing up, Spore Creatures for the DS, and I was able to convince her to lend it to me for this video, and I don't have much to say about it. It's not my kind of game. It is interesting to see how it takes the evolution and socializing mechanics from the original game and streamlines it into a rhythm game and like touchscreen based combat. They may have done the best with what they had, but I can't see this game really appealing to me, even as a kid. The most interesting of these spin-offs was 2011's Dark Spore, a game that has absolutely nothing in common with its parent and can nowadays be classified as lost media. Yes, a game that came out as recently as 2011 is lost. How? Because it was one of EA's stupid-ass online-only games, meaning there is literally no way to even open it unless you're connected to the game's servers, and since the servers went down in 2016, shortly after EA shuttered Maxis' head studio, the game is unplayable. Rip to anybody who bought it right before the servers went down, you ain't never getting any of that money back. Just by watching footage of it, it's pretty evident that Will Wright's influence over this franchise was long gone by this point. I mean, what is this? What does this have to do with Spore? It just looks like a mediocre Diablo or Helldivers clone with the name Spore slapped onto it. But it's dark.
Sir, people are really angry at us for abandoning Spore.
What do you mean? Just crank out another cheap half-ass spin-off to shut them up?
But sir, we're all out of ideas.
Well, I don't know. People didn't like it when we made the game like light and cutesy, so just try making like a dark Spore or something.
Say that again?
After this, the well completely dried up. EA stopped producing any new Spore-related content, shut down its social media accounts, and left the servers manned by a skeleton crew. They haven't even bothered to maintain the servers for anyone who bought CD copies of the game or people who purchased it through Steam, both of which apply to me, meaning I had no way of playing the game online. I had to contact EA's customer support hotline and verify I had legally purchased the game, twice, just to be granted access to its online features, which isn't ideal. So, is that it? Have EA properly given up on this franchise? Well, it's been 17 years since the game came out, and it's really starting to look that way. It is quite sad to think about all the potential games and franchises that either died or never got off the ground because some executive somewhere didn't believe in them. But this doesn't have to be the end of the story. Increasingly, the tools necessary for making games have been becoming more and more accessible to the general public. And because of this, indie developers have been becoming more common. No Man's Sky, the game that I won't shut up about, is an indie game. Despite the ambition that went into making it, despite the fact that it's technically the largest game ever made by humankind, it was made by a skeleton crew, and it can be a tad glitchy at times, I won't lie, and the devs admittedly cut a lot of corners in the game's earlier builds, but what Sean Murray was able to accomplish with a team of a dozen people is astonishing. Interestingly, No Man's Sky almost shared the same fate as Spore, except even worse. Now, I don't know how many of you toddlers watching this video remember ye olden days of 2016, but when No Man's Sky first came out, it was the most hated game of the year. Like with Spore, the developers had overpromised and underdelivered, but to a much larger extent. At least with Spore, you can say that the bare minimum of what was promised materialized, for the most part. The 2016 build of No Man's Sky was completely unfinished and lacked basic core mechanics that had been promised time and time again, like multiplayer, which was kinda supposed to be the foundation of the game. Had things gone differently, had Sean Murray cared for nothing else than his wallet, the devs might have taken their pre-order money and ran, abandoning No Man's Sky to remain in that unfinished state forever. But they didn't. They kept working on the game. Despite all the harassment and hatred and vitriol they received for putting out such an underwhelming product, they kept refining it year after year, slowly morphing it into what it was always supposed to have been. Today, No Man's Sky is a fully realized game with an active and committed player base, and many who used to hate Sean Murray now consider him to be redeemed. And believe me, redeeming yourself in the eyes of gamers that hate you is probably one of the most difficult things any human being could do. This could have been the case for Spore as well if EA hadn't just abandoned the franchise the second it didn't rake in the cash they wanted it to. Unlike No Man's Sky, Spore was finished enough at launch to attract a sizable fanbase. Yes, many who'd spent years waiting for the game were left disappointed, but a lot of us who played it were kids who didn't know anything about the game's development or what the devs had promised. We liked the game for what it was, flaws and all. For reference, Spore did decently well after its release, selling over 2 million copies worldwide, but this simply wasn't enough to meet EA's high expectations, and as previously mentioned, Will Wright ultimately left EA in 2009. But despite everything, all these years later, the game's fanbase is still holding strong. I am genuinely amazed by how active the Spore subreddit is, and how many views videos about this game still get in the year of our Lord 2025. That's dedication. Many players have taken it upon themselves to patch some of the game's bugs out, in addition to adding entirely new features, because even today, there's still an appetite for more Spore, one that EA, for whatever reason, will not acknowledge. Spore was a game that defined my childhood, and I'll always hold it dear for that reason. No matter how surface level it may have ended up being, it was kind of the perfect game for me at that stage in my life. Sure, the game wasn't fleshed out, but each of the 5 stages served as something of a taste test for their respective genres, enticing me to explore similar games. It's certainly not out of disdain, but out of love for the game that I'm still complaining about how EA tanked the franchise all these years later. When I say that EA ruined Spore, I'm not referring to what happened before the game came out. As we've already covered, I think a lot of missteps were made, but the true death blow to Spore is what happened after it came out. EA ruined Spore by abandoning it. No matter what you think the game should have evolved into, whether its sequel should have been a No Man's Sky adjacent space explorer with evolution mechanics, or a fleshed out strategy game where you create and manage an empire as it expands across the stars, or a more hands-off sandbox game where instead of controlling the creatures directly, you simply make changes to their biology and drop them into an environment to see how they'll do, or anything else for that matter, we never got to see it. I can understand from a business perspective why EA would have prioritized franchises such as FIFA or The Sims. They're fairly simplistic games that brought in routinely strong numbers, whereas Spore was a weird, complicated experiment that had been met with mixed reviews from critics. Makes sense to prioritize what you already know works. But I don't think EA fully realizes even today the potential of what they were and still are sitting on. A game that allows a player to create their own world every step of the way and nurture a species from the ground up, from single-celled to conquering space. The game we actually got is only a fraction of that idea's potential. And even so, had the game been patched continuously, more content and more of that potential could have shone through, but the game never got any significant patches. It is kind of ironic that a game all about evolution never got to evolve. I don't have any faith in EA, if I'm being entirely honest. But you know what I do have faith in? You guys. One day I do believe we will see a sequel to Spore, or at the very least a spiritual successor to it, though I'm a bit skeptical that EA will actually have anything to do with that game. In fact, as we speak, various fan games inspired by Spore are in production, the most prominent of which is called Elysian Eclipse. I am genuinely excited to see what these games will have to offer and how they will build upon what was set down back in 2008. And look, in all likelihood, not all of these fan games, hell, maybe even the majority of them, will never be finished, because, to be blunt, it takes a lot of time to make a video game by yourself. But what I can say with confidence is that the tools to create are more within our grasp as a community than they've ever been before. And I do have faith that ideas too weird or too unmarketable to be invested in by a large corporation will finally have a chance to see the light of day. Don't allow the big corporations to control what you can and can't play. I mean, at the end of the day, what was Spore trying to teach us? If you want to make something, make it yourself. To close out the video, let's take a look at what's inside the wormhole at the end of Spore.
The universe you inhabit is but one of many, countless worlds, unseen but yet connected. Your creative efforts have not gone unnoticed. Indeed, they have spilled into these other unseen worlds, just as your world has been enriched by them. It is now time for you to join us.
You are now to be given the power. Yes, that's right, the power. The power to create and spread life, intelligence, and understanding throughout the cosmos. Use this power wisely. Use this power so that we may one day become as one.
Spore ends by giving you the Staff of Life, which is an object that makes it easy for players to terraform and mold new planets as they please. It's a tool of creativity, encouraging you to get out there and take the universe by its balls. I feel like the double meaning here is fairly obvious, but if you watching this video want to make a game, don't quit just because you think it's necessary to have a big corporation backing you. The Staff of Life is now at your fingertips. So what are you gonna do with it? What an inspirational video this has been. Thank you for watching. Alright, I got a few things to get through. We're going to get through them really quickly. I won't waste your time, I promise. I have no access to my lighting equipment right now, so this is going to look like shit, and I apologize for that. It's called candid lighting. It's called vlog lighting. It makes it feel more authentic and natural. It's an artistic choice. Firstly, I would like to thank my buddy Madular for lending his voice to this video. It was very kind of him. He makes videos about other gaming stuff, so if you haven't checked him out already, go do it. What are you waiting for? And I would also like to thank my roommate Midnight Classics for lending his voice. If you haven't seen his videos, that's because he hasn't made any yet, but he does have a channel with 0 subscribers, and you know, if you go subscribe now, you could be the first to see when he posts a video. Also, thank you to Anthony Lund for providing his voice at the beginning as the old man narrating my life. I would also like to shout out the video Spore, Wide as a Lake, Deep as a Puddle. Watching that video is part of what made me want to make this video. Also, I totally lifted the idea to have one of the chapter titles be spelled out with Spore characters from that video. I'm sorry, it was too good to not do. I couldn't stop myself. And that brings me to the next matter I would like to address: Patreon. I'm aware that the second I said that word, your interest in continuing this video dwindled down to almost 0, but just hear me out. Just to be blunt, I think I messed up with my Patreon. I think I made it way too expensive considering what I offer. I want to remedy that by changing how I price it. So I'm going to be adopting a pay what you want model going forward. That means you can become a patron for any amount of money you want, so long as it's more than 70 cents. I had to put the floor somewhere. Quick update, Patreon actually doesn't let you make tiers that are less than $1, so the minimum has to be $1, but I would have put it lower. That means if you think that I'm worthy, you could continue paying the same amount that it currently costs, or you could pay a lot less. Or you could pay like way more also if that, you know, if that desire comes over you. That will give you access to early screenings of videos. You will be able to give input on what videos I make in the future. And also starting this week, Patreon-only Discord chats. Every Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to sit in a Patreon-only Discord channel in my server, and any patrons can come and chat with me about whatever they see fit. Even if no one's there, which I assume will happen a lot, I will just sit idly in the Discord channel for an hour, and you can just pop in and out if you please. Also, your name will come up at the end of every video. Speaking of names coming up at the end of the video, here's the patrons that made this video possible. Thank you to A Camp, Bitter Old Woman, Bill Skates, Siri Al, Yuri, Fiddle Stinks, JH, Liam Diaz, Mel, Nody Pop, Sith, T. Ledoux, Yapper, and Yehuda Katz. Thank you, you absolute legends. You make running this channel worth it. I know every YouTuber says this, but it really does genuinely mean a lot to know that somebody out there actually cares enough about the content you make to want to support it. So if you did like this video, please at least consider joining, because it really is getting harder and harder to justify the amount of time I put into these videos considering the amount of money they make in return. And obviously it's not just about the money, but money unfortunately still does matter. Just to come clean, I was actually considering retiring this YouTube channel at one point near the end of last year after I'd faced a year of health issues, and my motivation to continue was at an all-time low. I did decide to keep going, and I'm happy I made that decision, but any support from you guys would really help. That's all for now. Thank you all for watching. I don't know what to say to close out videos.